Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I believe in God. I believe in the supernatural God who created the heavens and the earth. I believe in a God who holds the heavens and the earth in existence. I believe that on the basis of rational evidence, similar to the beliefs held by the founders of this house, that men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not ashamed of being both a scientist and a Christian, because arguably Christianity gave me my subject. What I am amazed at is that serious thinkers today continue to ask us to choose between God and science. That's like asking people to choose between Henry Ford and engineering as an explanation of the motor car. Because he saw that God is not the same kind of explanation as a scientific explanation. God doesn't compete. Agency does not compete with mechanism and law. Why is there something rather than nothing? Alan Sandage, the brilliant cosmologist who became a Christian in his 50s, said God is the answer to that question. But people are now so desperate to show that the universe created itself from nothing, which seems to me to be an immediate oxymoron. If I say X created Y, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of Y. If I say X created X, I'm assuming the existence of X to explain the existence of X, which simply shows that nonsense remains nonsense even if high-powered scientists utter it. The heavens declare the glory of God, says the ancient psalm. But I want to come to what I think is one of the fundamental arguments for theism. I take it this house believes in reason. That's why we're all here. And as a scientist, I believe that the universe is rationally intelligible. That is something that has struck some of the geniuses of science as demanding an explanation. Einstein said the only incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. Leading philosopher Alvin Plantinga of Notre Dame says, if atheists are right that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then they have given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including their atheism. Their biology and their belief in naturalism would therefore appear to be at war with each other in a conflict that has nothing at all to do with God. By contrast with that, biblical theism asserts that ultimate reality is personal and intelligent, and the reason science works, and this was the motivating force that drove the great pioneers of science, is that the universe out there and the human mind in here that does the science are ultimately the product of the same intelligent divine mind. Human beings are made, we are told, in God's image. And that means that science can be done. That makes infinitely more sense to me as a scientist than atheism does. Now let me come briefly to ethics. Ethical behavior, like rational behavior, of course, does not itself require religious belief. This is consistent with the fact that humans are created in God's image as rational moral persons. But just as I suggest that rationality cannot be explained without the existence of God, so I dare to suggest that the existence of morality cannot be explained either. As modern science sprang from Judeo-Christian sources, so did the concept of human equality. Listen to atheist Jürgen Habermas, arguably one of Germany's leading intellectuals. He said that universalistic egalitarianism, from which sprang the ideals of freedom and a collective life and solidarity, the individual morality of conscience, human rights and democracy, is the direct legacy of the Judaic ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. And that brings me to my next evidence. It's the same with the universe. We can analyze it magnificently, but ultimately, if it has a maker, and I believe it has, only he can tell us what it's all about. And he's done so in the powerful narrative of the Bible. in particular in its analysis of the problem with humanity, not simply in terms of behavioral breakdown between people, but a vertical breakdown of trust between us and the Creator. The unique solution to that problem is not simply in terms of human ethical development, although that's very important, but in terms of something far deeper altogether. The restoration of the fractured relationship with God through the salvation he has brought through Jesus Christ. A radical relationship that empowers us to live ethically from God. And here we reach what for me is the chief evidence, not only for the existence but the nature of God. It is Jesus Christ. He it was who not only taught the golden rule, but embodied it, fed the hungry, healed the sick and suffering, and welcomed society's outcasts, brought honor and respect to the marginalized and ashamed. And he's brought forgiveness and peace to multi-millions around the world. He's able to do this, of course, because though he was a man, he uniquely never was only a man, but God become human. The central evidence for this startling claim is, of course, his historical resurrection from the dead that launched Christianity in the world. This is, of course, ladies and gentlemen, a crunch issue. If Jesus rose from the dead, death is not the end and atheism is false. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, Christianity is false. You say, that's intensely personal. But ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked tonight about belief in God. And I want to strongly emphasize that God is not a theory, he's a person. And if the origination of me qua person is a personal God, then the most exciting thing really is there a possibility of getting to know God? And so I don't simply believe there is a God. I've come to know him and trust him. And I have strong reasons for doing so, because of Christ dying and rising again for me. And that has generated in me a sense of utterly unmerited forgiveness, acceptance, and peace. That has enabled me to face the ugly side of my own nature, and with God's help to do something about it. But it's enabled me to face something else. The hardest problem I face as a Christian is the problem of evil and pain. My niece getting a tumor at 22 that kills her. What do I say to my sister? And this is the hardest problem we face. But it seems to me that atheism here has no answer, because by definition, atheism believes that human death is the end, so there is no ultimate hope. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, we could stay here till midnight and beyond arguing, as has been done in this university for centuries, what a good God should, might, would, could, if not, possibly might, just could he not have done, and we'll get nowhere. So it seems to me there's another question we can ask, and it's this. Granted that life presents us with a double picture. We see some beautiful things. We see some ragged edges. We see hurt and pain, and we see joy. How can we come to terms with that? And it seems to me here is no simplistic answer, but a window into an answer, and it's this. If it is actually true that Jesus is, as I believe him to be, the Son of God, then we can ask the question, what is God doing on a cross? And the answer comes back at the very least. God has not remained distant from our human suffering, but has become part of it. And the other side of that is this. Because Jesus rose from the dead, he is going to be the ultimate judge. Now here's an irony, because atheism has no ultimate hope of justice by definition. The vast majority of people in the history of the world have died without justice and will die without justice. And if death is the end, then of course they have no hope of ultimate justice. But the promise in the New Testament, guaranteed by the resurrection of Jesus, is that he is to be the judge in the coming day. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are some of the reasons why I believe that God is real and worthy to be trusted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. According to the Oxford University Press's World Christian Encyclopedia, 84% of the world's population belongs to some form of organized religion and believes in some form of God, which at the end of this year is about 5.9 billion people. Christians have about 2 billion of those 5.9 billion. About half of those are Catholics. Muslims come in at just a tad over 1 billion. Hindus at around 850 million. Buddhists at almost 400 million. And then several hundred million other ethno-religionists, animists, and other God believers around the world. Worldwide, there are about 10,000 distinct religions, each one of which may be further subdivided and classified. Christians, for example, may be apportioned among about 34,000 different denominations. From a scientist's perspective, such percentages cry out for an explanation. Why do so many people believe these things? But from a skeptic's perspective, which is what I do, what are the chances that these guys got the right God and the right religion, and the billions of other people that don't believe what they believe got it wrong? When you leave the house tonight, just ask yourself that question. What are the chances that they just happened to get it right, and the tens of billions of people that lived before Jesus, they never heard of it? The tens of billions of people that have lived since then who don't believe that, they just happen to be wrong? Or is it more likely that all of these religion and God beliefs are socially constructed, psychologically constructed, and that none of them are right in any reality sense, in the ontological sense? They're all constructed this way. In my few minutes, I will present to you two lines of evidence for this claim that humans created God and religion, not vice versa. The first is evolutionary theory. The second is social psychology, comparative world religions, and mythology. First, we go back in time. Our story goes back millions of years. So put yourself back in time, let's say 3.5 million years ago. You're a little hominid on the plains of Africa, a little Australopithecine. Your name is Lucy. Thank you. A lot of people in America don't get that joke. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? Well, if you assume that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error, a false positive. You thought A was connected to B, but you're wrong. That's a relatively harmless error to make. You just become more cautious, vigilant, skittish, like you see animals on the plains of Africa today. On the other hand, if you think the rustle in the grass is just the wind, and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, your lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early before reproducing. Now, what's the difference between the wind and a dangerous predator? The wind is an inanimate force. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent. His intention is to eat me, and that probably can't be good. So we also evolved the capacity not only to find these patterns and make those kinds of errors instead of the other, assume everything is real, we also infuse into those patterns intentional agency. We just think everything is not just real, but real and animated, alive, even if it's invisible. We now have a lot of evidence from cognitive psychology that this begins at a very early age, perhaps as early as age 2 or 3. I'll just give you one experiment among many. Jesse Baring's research with little children who are brought into a room, and they're given one of these little balls with Velcro on it, and you throw it at the dartboard and it sticks on it. That's the goal. So they're brought into the room, but they're not allowed to just do that with their good hand. They're turned around and they have to do it backwards. So they're really bad at it, as any of us would be. And then the experimenter leaves the room, and he says, just do the best you can and come out and tell me how you did. So, of course, they all walk up there and just stick it on the thing, right? All right. Part 2 of the experiment. The little children are brought in, and each of them is told, right next to the dartboard is a chair here. On the chair is Princess Anne. She's an invisible princess, and she can see everything you're doing. Experimenter leaves the room. All of a sudden, the children stop going up to cheat. The shadow of enforcement, the sort of infusion of agency of an invisible being in a chair that sees what we do, keeps track of our moral behavior, begins at a very early age. Our brains have evolved this capacity for agency. Two institutions evolved for that: government and religion. Government says, here's a copy of the rules, everybody gets one, and here's the punishments if you break the rules. Religion says, if you think you got away with it and you cheated the state, nuh-uh. There's an eye in the sky that knows all and sees all, and in the next life, justice will be served. That's a very powerful force for social control. Again, if it happens with little kids, you can do it with adults, which is what churches are all about. As a back-of-the-envelope calculation within an order of magnitude accuracy, we can safely conclude that over the last 10,000 years of history, there's been about 10,000 different religions and roughly about 1,000 different gods. Again, the house question for you, which side of the room you leave on tonight. What is the probability that Yahweh is the one true God in Amun-Ra, Aphrodite, Apollo, Baal, Brahman, Ganesha, Isis, Mithras, Osiris, Shiva, Thor, Vishnu, Wanton, Zeus, and the other 986 gods are all false gods? You guys are atheists just like me of all the gods I just rattled off. Some of us just go one God further. Now, think about this as another thought experiment. If you happen to be born in, say, the United States or England in the 20th century, there's a good chance that you believe that Yahweh is the all-powerful and all-knowing creator of the universe who manifested into flesh through Jesus of Nazareth. If you happen to have been born in India in the 20th century, there's a very good chance you're a Hindu who believes that Brahma is the unchanging, infinite, transcendent creator of all matter, energy, time, and space, and who manifests into flesh through Ganesha, the blue elephant god who is the most worshipped divinity in India. To an anthropologist from Mars, these are all indistinguishable. Of course, they're individually different, but taking the big picture, they're all indistinguishable in that sense. Flood myths, very common throughout history. Predating the biblical Noachian flood story by centuries, the Epic of Gilgamesh was written around 1800 BC, warned by Babylonian earth god Ea that other gods were about to destroy all life on by a flood. Utnapishtim was instructed to build an ark in the form of a cube, 120 cubits on each side, 180 feet roughly speaking, with 7 floors, each divided into 9 compartments in which 2 of every animal is to be brought onto the ship. Virgin birth myths likewise spring up throughout time and geography. Among those alleged to have been conceived without the usual assistance of the male lineage, and by the way, Mr. Hitchens, this comes from your brother's book, Dionysus, Perseus, Buddha, Attis, Krishna, Horus, Mercury, Romulus, and of course, Jesus. Consider the parallels between Dionysus, the ancient Greek god of wine, and Jesus of Nazareth. Both were said to have been born from a virgin mother who was a mortal woman but were fathered by the King of Heaven. Both allegedly returned from the dead, transformed water into wine, introduced the idea of eating and drinking the flesh and blood of the Creator, and to have been the liberator of mankind. Flood myths, not original to you. Virgin birth myths, not original to you. Resurrection myths, not original to you. Osiris is the Egyptian god of life, death, and fertility, and is one of the oldest gods for whom records have survived. Osiris first appears in the pyramid texts around 2400 BC. 2400 before that other guy, by which time his following was already well established. Widely worshipped until the compulsory repression of pagan religions in the early Christian era, Osiris was not only the redeemer and merciful judge of the dead in the afterlife, he was also linked to fertility, most notably and appropriately for the geography, the flooding of the Nile. By the way, there is a geographical link between flood myths and bodies of water that flood. Not universal floods, just where you happen to live. The kings of Egypt themselves were inextricably connected with Osiris in death, such that when Osiris rose from the dead, so would they in union with him. By the time of the new kingdom, not only the pharaohs, but the mortal men and women who built the pyramids. So here's what happened. The pharaohs figured out that if you offer eternal life for the workers, they'll work harder and you don't have to pay them as much. It's often claimed that you can't prove a negative. Us atheists, we can't prove there is no God. Okay, I can prove that humans created gods and religions, and I just did. And there's 50 more stories like this of the geographical location, the time you happen to have been born, the anthropology of religion, the psychology of religion, the sociology of religion. We know exactly how this happens now, all the way down to the neurology, the neuroscience of religion. We know that people are making this up. Now, of course, you can make the argument, well, God planted the God module in the brain so he could talk to us or something. How come we all seem to talk to different gods then? Are there just a bunch of them out there and they're competing for our brains? Why is it, as Dan Barker pointed out, there's very little agreement amongst believers? Why is that? So my conclusion then is that as you think about the House vote tonight, again, what's more likely? It's obvious that all these other gods are made up. You already know that. You agree with me on that. You're all atheists for all those other gods. So I would just implore you to go one God further. Thank you.